You're listening to In Bad Company. Today we are talking to Donnie Roessling, a paranormal expert. This is a really cool interview. We talk about the history of St. Augustine, the oldest city in America, and he shares several stories of the hauntings therein. Check it out. Well, today we have Donnie Roessling. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, of course. Glad to have you here. So I met you on a ghost city tour in St. Augustine, Florida. And you were the tour guide, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're the awesome guy we did the tour with. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun having you on. You had a lot of cool stories, and I just kind of love to hear more about you and hear some of those stories as well. So I was just kind of curious, like, how did you get started being at Ghost City Tours?
To be honest with you, I went looking for a job that I would actually like.
Yeah.
Uh, Before I went and I was doing the tour guides with Ghost City Tours, I was either slinging paint or I was in the finance field, and both of those kind of sucked, to be honest with you. Pay the bills, but
Yeah.
after a while I got tired of that. So I've always been interested in ghost stuff naturally from where I grew up, and I saw the opening, got lucky enough to get it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what was the kind of interview process, or is it just kind of like, we'll teach you?
They were big on teaching me. The main interview thing was, are you comfortable with people, in front of people? So my streaming and my YouTube side of stuff actually, I think, not 100% sunk me the job, but definitely was a plus for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. You can be in front of people and kind of carry on. So, yeah, why don't you tell a little bit about what you do on the kind of streaming space?
On the streaming side, so usually daily, at least recently daily, I play games throughout the day, just interact with people. And I started that off just to kind of, make friends, to be honest with you, social thing. And after a while, I got enough people watching daily that we started every week doing like a little wrestling show to, settle beefs, have smack talk throughout the week. Just a little fun thing we do. And then I usually make YouTube videos out of the wrestling show and the games as well. So kind of varied depending.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. So you have a full-on wrestling league that you're over.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm super into it. It started it's one of those things where it was just a random thing we did one night and like everybody showed up for it, so we did it the next week and it just kept on from there.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. It's so interesting because I feel like when you run into someone like a tour guide or something, they always have stories. I just feel like it's something, yeah, like that you choose to go into, so that's kind of cool that you look for something that you wanted to do and that you were excited about. So I think you've got a story for us, as you are the tour guide, about a local bar that you inhabit.
Absolutely. So right beside where we started our tours, the home base, the Ghost City Tours, is a bar called Stogie's. Now, Stogie's specializes in drinks, foods, and cigars mainly. I know you walked by, I'm sure you could smell it. Awesome place to be. It's been there since I can remember, to be honest with you. Well, the history there is actually super interesting. Back in the 90s, the current day owner, he was renovating Stogie's to what it is today, and he was trying to save a little money by not getting a hotel or a motel. So he stayed at the second floor of where the bar is today with his dog. And the very first night, he was planning on like a 2-week stay. The very first night, his dog started freaking out, acting like somebody was in the room with him. And he could have swore he heard something downstairs, so he thought maybe somebody was breaking in. He went downstairs, searched the entire house. He even went as far as going outside and looking around the corner. He said, saw absolutely nothing, not even a sign that somebody was there. When he came back in after a few minutes of searching, he went up to where his dog was, still freaking out up on the second floor. But this time, he's got the lights on. He's able to pay a bit more attention. He didn't just wake up. Now he can notice where his dog is really barking. And his dog was looking at this unfinished bathroom up on the second floor. It really weirded him out. What he ended up doing the next day, he did leave. He went to a motel or a hotel. And he started doing some research. He found out the reason his dog was probably freaking out, the house that he had just bought and he was looking to renovate into his business was back in the day the spot of the biggest high-stakes illegal poker tournament in Florida. It was so big it would actually draw in people from outside of the state. Well, one of the poker tournaments they had going on, it was super exclusive. There was only 8 people. The first round got done, and the 4 winners went upstairs to play the finals, essentially. One of the losers, like I said, it was a super high-stakes tournament, and this was higher than typical. He was not happy that he had just lost. So he barred the doors after a couple of minutes once he knew they were all up there, all of the winners, and he set the house on fire. The story goes they were so into their card game and winning their money, they didn't smell the smoke or anything until it was far too late. All 4 of those men ended up losing their lives. We think to this day that's what his dogs were barking at. That room was probably where the poker tournament itself was being held. On top of that, I don't know if you got a chance to go in or not, but if you go up there to the second floor in between the songs, because there's always some sort of live music, it's very frequent. A lot of people say they can hear chairs scraping that aren't there, and the sounds of decks shuffling and people murmuring like they're playing some sort of card game when it's just people hanging out and having a drink. It's really a creepy place, and hearing the story was awesome.
Wow. That is so crazy. Have you ever heard anything like that yourself? Like
About Stogies in particular?
Yeah, there or just anywhere in St. Augustine.
So I hadn't actually heard about the illegal poker tournament before, but I had heard that Stogies was incredibly haunted. One of my good friends when I was going to high school, his dad was a bar hopper. I don't know. He went out drinking almost every night. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So he always had some sort of story. And Stogies, he was convinced something weird was going on there. He believed more on the demonic side, something along those lines. But I think 4 dudes losing their lives for high stakes poker sounds more about right?
Yeah. Dang. Yeah, that's so crazy. Yeah, actually, so do you believe in ghosts?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
What's your reasoning behind that? Like, have you encountered something, or is that just something that you believe based on what you've heard? Or
even as far as like if I just do my previous experiences with ghost city tours, I think I told the story about James at one of our cemeteries. He's a young boy who died there. One of the continuous stories that the guides tell each other is that after a while of telling James a story, if you stand close enough to the gate while you're telling it, you might be able to feel something. I thought it was a load of baloney because before I believed in ghosts, but I'd never had like a physical sensation.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, I felt something multiple times grab me across the gate. It's definitely weird.
Gosh. Yeah. Those feelings. And I think, some people who wouldn't believe in any type of, supernatural or anything would argue it's like, oh, that's just your brain, something's going on there. But having feelings to me is such an interesting thing, right? Like something that you viscerally feel, is something. It's like, there's got to be something there,
It's much harder for me to deny. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, well, it's not provable. It's like, well, it's not disprovable either, I guess. So, yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks for sharing that story, man. I think we'll get another story at the end here. So I'd love to hear, so St. Augustine, so oldest city in America. Do you buy into that? Is it the oldest city in America?
It is, if you add in the continuously running settlement. So there is a Pensacola. They do have signs that they had settlements before St. Augustine, but they were abandoned. So if you count the longest running European settlement, it wins. It's just not the oldest.
Right. Yeah, it almost kind of feels like world's best cup of coffee type situation, It's like how many places say, they've got through that. But
Exactly. Yeah.
so yeah, so you grew up your whole life in St. Augustine, is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Never uh permanently moved outside of it. No.
Yeah, cool. I'd love to hear just like what's kind of like a snapshot of your years kind of growing up in Florida, or St. Augustine, and just kind of like what was that like, Who was Donnie before?
Well, like what Florida was like before. It was definitely a lot smaller here in St. Augustine. When I was growing up, my road was dirt until I was like, 8 or 9, I want to say, till I was about to be in middle school. It felt a lot more. I almost want to say country, even though it's St. Augustine. It felt a lot smaller. As I've grown up, we've gotten a lot bigger, especially for tourism. Like we had Nights of Lights when I was young, but it wasn't big. Now it's so big. I have friends from New York telling me they have commercials about St. Augustine Nights of Lights, which
Yeah.
to me is insane. Um, but that's St. Augustine growing up. As far as me, it was definitely a unique experience, I think. Um, Especially being in Florida, you kind of take all the Spanish architecture and the influences that St. Augustine has for granted. And then you go over to like Orlando or Jacksonville or even like another small town like Ocala or something like that. And all of a sudden you can appreciate it a little more.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It almost seems like maybe you have felt this, but it seems like there's a growing desire to kind of have different experiences, like, Disney is its own thing, but it's like, is there somewhere we can be, just a different vibe? I think it's St. Augustine and Disney are such different places. Do you kind of feel that, like, or see that desire?
Oh, absolutely. And then even in between St. Augustine and Disney, you got in my opinion, Daytona, a whole third place, and we're all within 2 hours of each other. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with it.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. We've it was my mother-in-law who kind of grew up vacationing there in the summer, and so uh we're all from Michigan, and so Florida in the winters is definitely a thing that we partake of quite a bit.
Hmm.
But she grew up there and just kind of like a beautiful area. So I had never been there before. And then I went with my wife's family, and it's just like, man, it's such a cool area, and there's so much history there. The fort is so cool to me. Um, have you ever made your way to Michigan?
No, but I want to so bad. I have a lot of friends up there.
Oh, nice.
Naturally, over the years, I meet a lot of people from Michigan
Yeah,
to the point where I'm going in northern Florida, honestly.
there you go.
Or we're southern Michigan, one or the other.
That's great. Yeah, I do. I mean, it's a whole culture up here. It's like, oh yeah, you go to Florida in the summer because it's like, how far away can we get from the winter, in a direct shot,
Mhm.
and um, but yeah, I think it does feel to me like culturally, there's different vibes, but it feels to me like Florida and Michigan are not that far apart. Like, I don't know. I think sometimes some of the middle states feel even just more of a cultural difference to me, and I think so many people from Michigan come down there. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, it's cool to see that. So,
I talk to people from across the nation all the time, even before this job, when I was doing finance, and I full on agree with you. I did. Michigan is very close to Florida. We vibe very well versus like even just Florida and Virginia, closer to us technically.
yeah, I feel that too. It's just it's so interesting how they're kind of more connected in that way. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. What kind of games do you play for your stream? We'll jump back into the pod here with that question.
Um, it varies. Lately, it's been a lot of single player like story games. Spent like a month playing The Witcher, and right now I'm on Middle Earth. Um, but my friends who watch me stream usually like me to be in pain, so it'll usually be something hard.
Yeah. So
Mm.
right for the Elden Ring and the the Bloodborne kind of
Hmm.
stuff. Or
Exactly. Absolutely.
uh, yeah, I don't know what it is, but games like that to me, like I do just love watching it. I totally see people like streaming it. I'm like, I enjoy watching other people play. It's too hard. It's too hard for me.
Mm, I do get a sense of satisfaction when I'm done, without a doubt. But I think I agree with you. I enjoy watching other people play them too. You know.
Definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, so what is I was curious kind of like what your kind of philosophy, this is, sounds like a heavier question, but I like what's your philosophy of life, I guess, with like you're closer to like a lot of like supernatural stuff than I think most people look. And I guess how do you see that in your kind of your worldview, I guess, you know?
Absolutely. I think it's definitely grown more so over the past couple of years as well. As I get older, it's
Mhm.
naturally going to shift. But definitely being from somewhere where I feel like uh the proof is in the pudding is here. You know what I mean? Like maybe not the afterlife that everybody believes in, but something for sure being there, at least some sort of spiritual attachment that, I mean, it's definitely weighed pretty heavily on me, you know?
Mhm.
I think ultimately it just, I've especially lately just trying to be happier because you don't want to end up like I'm gonna call out one of the people from my stories, like a Bishop Varro. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So angry in life that the effects of your death keep you trapped here. You know, and
Mhm.
to an extent, I feel like a lot of people are walking around like that, pent up, angry. And if they were to die today or tomorrow, they might be hanging around still upset, you know?
Yeah. I do think, yeah, that's a lot. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Shaun of the Dead. Are you familiar?
Yeah.
Okay. I love so the beginning part when they're showing all of like the hourly workers, you know, doing the same exact thing, and it's kind of like joking like they could be a zombie. Like there's not any life there, right? They're doing the same motions, you know, same things. And um it's I feel so many times like we need people or things to like help us like look up, you know, like what's going on or why am I doing this, you know, or am I just like, oh, just doing my 9 to 5 so I can get a retirement and then move to Florida, which is a great place, but you
Mm-hmm.
know, it's like there's got to, you know, like what's more, what's the reasoning there, you know, and just like um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like I'm all about that, you know, like choosing joy and kind of seeking that, you know. And I don't understand when people deny anything spiritual or supernatural or like, you know, to me, it's just there's too much going on and there's too much like something's got to be there, you know.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it's definitely one of those, they have to have the proof. And I can, I can believe that somebody can go their whole life without experiencing something that I can get with. I
Yeah.
just can't believe somebody not 100% believing, like you were saying. It just don't make sense. So I think if anybody spent like I don't want to go ahead. I don't want to say like be a ghost tour guide because that might not guarantee the experience. But
Right.
if they don't believe in it, go to like the fort or go to like Savannah or somewhere haunted. You could for sure get that belief real quick, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, in the fort, I remember there was a section that I believe where because I know you told a story there, but there was I think there was like the old jail or something that you had to crawl into. Is that
Mhm.
what that was? Is what that the jail or the
Yes, the fort when it was when the Spanish controlled it, it was a defensive fort, but eventually the British took over and turned it into a prison, and it
Okay.
was a terrible, terrible, terrible place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just remember that was one of the places where I walked in like on a, you know, just a part of that tour and it's just like, man, you feel something. And it's just like there's something here. There's something still here, you know, whether that's ghosts or some type of energy, you know, or something in that place. This podcast is brought to you by Heathfall LLC. Looking to upgrade your space with new floors or fresh new coat of paint? Heathfall LLC has you covered. Proudly serving Northern Michigan, we specialize in expert flooring installation and professional painting, bringing craftsmanship, precision, and personal touch to every project. Whether you're dreaming of beautiful hardwood, sleek vinyl, or durable laminate, we'll help you bring your vision to life. And if your walls need a refresh, our painting crew delivers clean lines and flawless finishes every time. Reliable, efficient, detail-driven. That's Heathfall LLC. To me, it's exciting because the world gets bigger the more you like look into this stuff, and I think there's room for a lot of just understanding of humanity and just like I think the things that we do. To quote Gladiator, I did mention I was a movie podcast host as well, so the things that we do in life echo in eternity, and I do believe that too. So. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'm curious too, because I do believe in a to get right down to it, like a Christian God. And I think a lot of people who believe that don't believe in ghosts at all and deny that. And I don't know what your experience is, but I do believe that there's a lot of room within even that belief system to be like, there's a lot going on here. Let's be open and like look with our eyes to that spiritual world. I was curious if you had any opinions on that or experiences with that.
So I've had a few conversations with a couple of like Christian friends, I guess that, you would say. I'm more of a non-believer, I would say, in anything in particular right now.
Yeah.
But I've had this like sort of thought process before. I definitely think Christianity leaves open. It depends on, I think, on how you interpret the different plane. Like, I don't want to say planes, but like heaven and hell, and like I'm pretty sure purgatory and limbo is part of it, right? Like, why can't you being a ghost be the purgatory and limbo? You're not good enough to get into heaven, not bad enough to get into hell. But with that being said, I'm not like a super well-versed guy on it.
Yeah. No, I was just curious because I kind of like to link those two things together, just like in my own mind and for, just things like that too. Because it's like, I think, like I said, I know a lot of people that shut down conversation like that. It's like, that doesn't exist. I was like, well, let's look at it though. Like, what is there, and for being within, even in Christianity, it's funny because you could say, well, I don't believe in ghosts, but it could be a demon, or maybe that is some type of thing that's like, yeah, that soul is in purgatory and that's their punishment. I'm like, so there's room, it's like, okay, what are we, at the end of the day, what are we arguing here? It's like, no, but not a lot.
So we're agreeing is what you're saying.
Yeah. It's like, no, it's not that, it's this. I'm like, it's Pepsi or Coke, it's still pop, but although you probably don't call it pop. Do you call it pop in Florida?
No, it's soda. It's
soda.
Weird to hear pop, I'm not gonna lie.
You're like, what is he talking about?
Yeah.
I looked it up one time because I have cousins that live in Virginia, and they would ask for Coke. Everything was Coke, and then they say, what kind of Coke do you want? Which that one was so confusing to me. It's like it's like, I have a Coke. What kind of Coke? It's like a root beer. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, Pepsi. Yeah.
Pepsi. Yeah. Give me a Coke. I'll have a Pepsi. I think so. There was a Faygo factory in Michigan, and so they called it Faygo Pop. So I think that's where pop came from. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Next time you're with some Michigan people on your tour, you can bring up that little tidbit, and so that's a fun one. So yeah, so you've talked to people all over the world. So people that have come like on your tour and stuff. Is there anyone that like really just kind of wowed you, like where they were from or just anything like that?
Not really necessarily where they were from. It does kind of surprise me how far people come from just to like meet up with friends and that's their vacation, Like growing up for me, I went to Disney World and stuff like as a kid, but it was always like, to me, that's a huge thing. And St. Augustine isn't like a huge thing, but I've run into a lot of people where it's like they're from New York and they're from California, and the meeting place was St. Augustine for some reason, you know?
Yeah.
Um, the only other thing I would say is there's this girl from Orlando who's I've given her like 3 tours. She is super into it, you know, over like 4 months. But aside from that, no,
That's
not really.
she's a researcher. You're gonna get invited on a podcast pretty soon. Yeah, that's what's gonna
Yeah, I'm expecting it. Yeah, either that or I'll get mugged, you know,
happen.
one or the other.
Yeah. Uh, well, it was so funny. So I was with my family on the tour, and was like, I'm gonna ask that guy to be my podcast. This would be a really interesting conversation. What did you think about that when I came up to you and was like, "Do you want to be on my podcast?" Have you ever been asked that before?
No, well, yes, but no, not by a random person. I've only ever been asked by friends and stuff, you know. I was actually excited. I'm not gonna lie.
Sweet.
The first time being asked by a random person to be on a podcast, heck yeah, I'm excited for that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah,
Means I made a good impression, you know?
yeah, yeah. No, I like because I was just like, man, and it sounds like you haven't been doing the Ghost City tours for that long, right? You said few months, something like that.
I started taking my first tours like beginning of January.
Okay.
I started training like December-ish.
Yeah. What does the training look like for that?
They had me fall. So we had a like a senior guide. She's not with us, unfortunately. She ended up moving away, but I followed her around for like 2 or 3 tours, just listening to the stories, and they sent me like a 30-page script, something like that. And then at the end of 4 or 5 tours, they had me give like the last tour on my own with the tour guide there as like a safety net.
Yeah.
And if once you're good with that, you're good to go.
That's cool. So it's a lot of like, I guess part acting, part kind of like apprenticeship type thing. Would you say?
In a way,
Yeah.
hopefully the bosses aren't listening. I'm not gonna lie to you. Like as soon as I got out of training, I just started adding my own spice to it because I'm trying to have a fun, entertaining time, not
Right.
right. But yeah, ultimately,
Yeah.
apprenticeship, a little bit of acting, having some
Yeah.
fun.
That's awesome. What are some things like you've added, or what kind of like humor, or just kind of more details?
I know we did some of the unofficial stops, so I definitely did the unofficial stops I added. Like we talked about the Casa de Sueños, which was the inn where I was talking about the bay windows are super nice. But I'll just tell the story real quick. So
Yeah.
there we have a
Rock and
spot
roll.
called Casa de Sueños. It is a bed and breakfast, awesome spot to be. Growing up in the town, when I was driving by younger, my uncle was driving me. I remember looking at the bay windows and pointing them out to him, saying, hey, those are absolutely awesome. And then I also have sold paint in St. Augustine I sold it for like 8 or 9 years, a very long time. So I know for a fact I've sold the paint for those windows, But the reason for those windows being there kind of morbid. In St. Augustine, like pretty much nothing ever changes thanks to the historic board. Those windows, the reason they're actually there, it was the Casa de Sueños was originally a morgue, and during the Spanish flu, they started taking the piles of bodies that were piling up in the street and putting the bodies up in the windows so that people could safely go and identify that their family members were dead. Give a little bit of dignity back to the dead and the family, but also handle the dead bodies in the street. So I like to talk about that. I think that's a really cool, like morbid story that we don't add in. There's also, I don't know if I brought up the crack house or not when we were doing it, but there's like a crack house where there's some really weird pictures that look like somebody's in there, but there's absolutely not. Every time it tries to get renovated, whatever excuse you can think of has been thrown at it. It's a really weird home that I'm positive is on like a grave site or something. They find out all the time that there's mass grave sites over here and over there, and I'm positive that there's one underneath that house. But aside from the unofficial stops, yeah, just like a little bit of humor or TripAdvisor reviews, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty cool. Just hearing real hand accounts. Like it feels like something like TripAdvisor, it's not just like they say, like it made it very tangible. Like well it was it was a couple on their honeymoon, I believe that you read.
Yeah, where they wouldn't take a shower because they thought somebody was watching them.
Yeah.
Not me, man. Not in Florida. I'd be taking that shower.
It's like, well, enjoy the view, I guess. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was really interesting. Yeah, with those windows, it's like such a crazy time. So the flu's going through and you don't know family members, friends, and just like, oh yeah, let me take a walk by and see if they're still alive. Like that's such a what a crazy time that would be.
It's got to be surreal to see Uncle James
Yeah.
gray up in a window. Yeah.
Man.
And you got to be the one to go tell his sister. So like your mother, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Man. Well, I liked everything you added. I thought it was super fun. Is there anything that's like crazy that's happened on tour or something strange? Just like the tour itself, like did it, something go wrong or anything crazy or?
Nothing too crazy that I can think of. Like the only thing I can think of, like my second tour, it was really early on, but it wasn't my first tour. We were going by the Love Tree, and there was like a couple about to fight that we were walking by. And that was really weird because I'm kind of like, I don't know if I seemed like it, but I don't do super well necessarily in crowds, I try to like be outgoing and stuff, but I get anxious when people start popping off, and I'm sitting there telling my story like, are we gonna have to restrain this dude? Cause he's talking about, I'm gonna beat you up right here, Like, do I stop my story to talk to this guy? Cause he's 5 feet away. So that's probably the weirdest thing to happen. Outside of that, nah, just like homeless people hanging out, blaring their music, having fun.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was a different thing as well. So Michigan doesn't have a lot of homeless that would be downtown most of the time. And for me, I'm always like, obviously homelessness, I'm not trying to, put down anybody who's going through that because usually some type of struggle going on for sure. But I'm always like, hey, if I had to be homeless, I would not live in Michigan,
No.
So,
absolutely not.
Yeah.
Harsh winters, right?
Right. There's still snow on the ground, and it's April 9th up here, something like that. So we're recording this. But yeah, there was a guy, and I don't know, maybe he's a regular down there, but he was on the corner of the kind of, what's the street that all the kind of stores are on that you walk? It's like walking only.
St. George, probably what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that street, and he was full on end times prophesying, and anti-Christ.
Was he talking about the government?
Yes.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, that guy.
Delusional Dave. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Delusional Dave. Is that his actual name?
Yeah, me and my friends call him that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I hope oh, go ahead.
Oh no, he's definitely something.
Yeah. I hope you don't take offense to this, but I also thought about asking him on the podcast. I was like, let's see, guys.
No,
say,
I would watch that podcast twice. No offense at all.
Yeah. It's like, man,
I've thought about stopping off and having a conversation with him, high key, but I'm kind of afraid for my safety at the same time, so I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely he's an interesting guy.
Right. Yeah. A very intense person. He's kind of like, when we passed him, passed him several times, but he was very much talking like he was talking to someone volume, but just kind of like looking like at nothing really. But yeah, it was just like, it's like, man, he's got a lot of say. So that's interesting there. So, but yeah, circling back to the kind of just like what you were talking about, how it's like, being built like over like burial grounds and that kind of thing. I told my father-in-law this, but we went into the store like that was like the prehistoric kind of stuff, where they were selling like they've got a big woolly mammoth tusk in there, things like that. They sell like old coins, that kind of stuff. Um, and I I am a big believer in like Indian artifacts. I feel like there's a different mojo there. Like, I don't know, just hearing about all these like burial grounds and different things. Like, I think there's some things that's like some of these objects, like, it's like, oh, hey, you bought an ancient shark tooth? Cool. But like, I don't know, it sketches me out to be like, yeah, there's this ancient, artifact from, these Native Americans. And like, I'm just going to bring it back into my home. I'm like, I don't know, just be careful.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. They put too much love in the stuff they made. They're
Yeah.
spiritually connected to it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Is there any back to St. Augustine in general, but it's so funny because when I was like kind of starting to be interested in because when I came there previously, I saw you guys do ghost tours. I looked it up and I searched like, oh, haunted places in St. Augustine, and it comes with a like top 10 most haunted places in St. Augustine. It's not just, oh, here's one of the really top one. Like, it's like so many places there have like so much like history. And I don't know, like, do you see any, what is the most, like, what would you say is the most haunted place in St. Augustine?
Ooh, the most haunted place in St. Augustine. And I'm accounting for, I do believe some of the stories naturally from businesses are malarkey. They're just trying to get in. So accounting for that, I high-key think the fort, without a doubt. Either the fort or the lighthouse, as far as definitely seeing a ghost, like guaranteed of it. I wouldn't go into the fort anytime after dark, though, for sure. Without a doubt.
Yeah, which you brought that up on the tour. So the fort, actually, would you mind telling that story? Just like the fort story you tell at the end?
Absolutely. So the fort, I usually start off with like an explanation of coquina as a good like segue for the people who aren't aware. Coquina is like early day concrete. It was huge for St. Augustine in Spain getting its foothold in the New World because all the forts they made beforehand got burned down. So when they eventually found this compressed shell, almost early form of concrete over on the island, just a mile or two away, it was essentially all they needed to fix their issues here in the New World. So once they built this it was our 8th fort, the new fort out of Coquina. The only thing they really needed was somebody who would be able to actually hold that fort. Because, they were defending from the Indians, the French, and the British. They ended up settling on this man named Captain Martin. Now, Captain Martin, the way he's described, is like a serial killer Shrek, just like a war-grizzled man who's quite violent. Not somebody you and I would go and have a beer with, probably. I don't know who you hang out with, but more than likely not. But definitely somebody you would want to violently defend your fort. So they went to Martin, and Martin said, yes, I'm your guy. I'll absolutely go and hold that fort down. But before I go on, I'm going to go ahead and start my family. So he went to a little town close to him called Valencia. Now, in Valencia, he found the prettiest woman that he could find. He went to her family and he said, listen, your daughter's beautiful. I'm a man of means. I'm a man of wealth. I'm a military man. I'm going to the New World and I would love to take her with me. I have this huge sack of cash. Can I have your daughter's hand in marriage? No family at the time is going to refuse that. So they absolutely took the cash. They got a huge amount of money. He gets a beautiful wife to take with him over to the New World. Everybody wins, right? Not everyone except for 15-year-old Dolores. Not quite so much does she win. So she spends the next couple of months within the fort, not able to leave the walls. Martin essentially locks her inside. It is not safe over in the New World outside of the fort. Now, Martin, he's a rough dude, but he does feel for his wife, at least as much as he can at the time. He buys her expensive perfumes that smell like Valencia oranges. He gets her any sort of food she's looking for. He even sometimes lets her be in the same room with him for extended periods of time. It was kind of a big deal to him to keep her happy. So after a few months, when she comes to him and she says, "Sir," which I'm pretty sure that's how you refer to your husband at that time, uh, I can't spend the rest of my life within these four walls. He really feels it. It does get to him. It plucks at his heartstrings. So he goes to his right-hand man, Manuel Abuela. Now, Manuel doesn't take long to agree to his orders. Martin looks at Manuel and he says, "Manuel, you've been in my service for a long time. I want you to follow my beautiful wife around and make sure she's safe." Now, like I had mentioned, Manuel accepts almost immediately. Martin made the biggest mistake he probably would have ever have made. He didn't do enough thought about Manuel and his history before he decided to put him here. He just assumed that he'd be able to trust him. See, 16-year-old at this point, Dolores, is being watched by 17-year-old Manuel, so they're pretty close in age. 16-year-old Dolores is married to the serial killer Shrek, and she's about to be spending night and day with what's described as a very handsome young man, On top of that, Manuel was actually from Valencia as well. He knew Dolores's family before he went into military service. I'm not sure if Martin actually knew this or not, but he didn't take it into account when he asked Manuel to guard young Dolores, and it didn't take very long for them to go on long platonic night walks at night, But everybody around them knew exactly what was going on. They knew they were getting freaky in the worst ways, but nobody was going to tell Martin, because Martin had already, up until that point, murdered a few people for less. Honestly, nobody wanted to be the messenger that got shot. Unfortunately for Dolores and Manuel, Manuel himself would be that messenger. See, every morning you had to check in with your superior officer to get your orders. Didn't matter that Manuel's orders were the same every single morning. He still had to see Martin face to face. Well, this particular morning, I'm not sure if maybe Manuel forgot to wash up the night before. Maybe he just overslept. Whatever it was, he got a little bit too close to Martin, and Martin had smelled something he was all too familiar with. He knew exactly what he was sniffing. See, I had mentioned that Martin liked his wife enough to buy her expensive gifts, right? Including the expensive perfume that smells like Valencia oranges. Well, that's exactly what he's smelling on Manuel, and he knew that nobody for thousands of miles would know what Valencia oranges were, what they smelled like, or have the money to buy the stuff. So he knew exactly what was going on between Manuel and Dolores. So he looked at his guards that were guarding the door and he said, "Go get my young, beautiful wife." Manuel knew something was up. He had asked a couple of questions, but Martin wasn't saying anything until Dolores was brought in by those two guards. She was sat down, and Martin looked at the two of them, and 16 and 17-year-old Dolores and Manuel, he asked them, "How would you like to die today?" It's a pretty rough thing to be asked, and I think anybody with a brain would answer probably the same way. Martin looked at the two of them and he gave them two options. He said, "You could be cut down where you stand right here, right now, or you could spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." Now, you and I probably go rest of our life looking over our shoulder. Martin knew exactly what they would be choosing, and he was a cruel man. He knew exactly what he would do. See, he meant every single word that he said, and he meant, how would you like to die today? See, when they choose the rest of their life looking over their shoulders, he has his guards grab Manuel and Dolores up. He takes them down into a powder room that he knows he is about to be boarding up for the foreseeable future. And he has the two of them chained to a wall with their necks cranked over so that the last things they saw, smelled, heard, and experienced was the dead or dying bodies of their loved ones. And unfortunately, it's not a story that really has a happy ending. The people do eventually ask about Dolores and Manuel, but Martin made up a story for each of them. He said Dolores went back to Spain to take care of her sick aunt, and Manuel had a special operation in Cuba. And past that, nobody asked about him anymore. It wasn't until 100 years later when the British took over the fort, and they're turning that fort into the prison like we were talking about earlier. Well, they were looking at that blueprint and they noticed that there's, 100 square feet they're not using. That's like 300 or 400 dudes they could stuff in there. They're definitely going to need to bust this down and make use of this square footage. Well, the story goes, when they bust it down, there is an overwhelming smell that hits those soldiers. It's not death. It's not decay. It's not mold or mildew. It's not powder. The first thing they smelled was Valencia oranges. And when they went into the powder room in the back, they found the bones of Dolores and Manuel. And unfortunately, the sad part about all of it is they're still there at the fort. If you go by late at night, there's stories of a young woman who was walking across the top of the fort. I'll be honest, I haven't had the chance to see it because usually they say she shows up at 1 or 2. I'm sleeping. But a young woman in a flowing gown, and then always 10 paces behind her is a young military man in full regalia. A lot of people think that is Dolores and Manuel, doomed forever to be apart because Manuel feels shame for not fulfilling his last order correctly. And that's the doomed lovers of the fort.
Wow. That's crazy. So how long did they find those bones? Like how long after?
100. So I think it was like 104 years, but ultimately like 100 years later.
Wow. That's just crazy. So there's no possible way that scent lasted that long, right?
No, in my head, there's no way. Absolutely not. I mean, maybe it was expensive perfume. Maybe there was a reason it was so expensive.
Yeah. That's why it was so valuable. It stayed around for 100 years. Man, yeah, that's crazy. So what's the stuff called the fort's made out of?
Coquina.
Coquina. And I'm not sure why I threw a little accent on there. Coquina.
Oh, that's how it's said. I like that,
All right, there we go. It's like I'm the guy that goes to the Spanish restaurant and it's like, some fajitas, please, trying to sell the authenticity there. For some reason, I feel like that's in my head too. Like if you're speaking to someone who doesn't speak English or maybe it's not their first language, like if you speak with their accent in English, maybe somehow they'll get it. I don't know. I don't think it's true. So
it helps. I've seen things on it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. So the coquina is, so if I learned this correctly, right, they take it out of the ground. It's compressed like sand and shell, and then it's removed and dried. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah. It's when they're mining it. Like I say early concrete because if somebody was to run their hands across it and didn't know that they're touching like shell and sand, they would 100% think they're touching like, worm swirl or really rough grade concrete. But that's exactly what it is. It's a little bit, it's not as dense as concrete, so they can mine out these big blocks of it and drag it over to where the fort's at now.
Yeah, that's crazy. And so is it true I read somewhere that there would be like salt in that too, right?
I believe. I'm not 100%, but I've heard that, yeah.
I was just curious, like, because I feel like, you hear a lot of salt being involved in different supernatural, things like protection or, to keep spirits at bay. Just like, I was like, I wondered, have you heard anything about that with like the fort? And
that does make a lot of sense, actually. So not necessarily with the fort, but with the city itself, it was wrapped in a wall of coquina. And the story goes, coquina itself traps spirits. I've heard explained a lot of different ways, but the salt's actually probably the best way I've heard it explained so far. If there is salt in coquina, that would make total sense. The lore here, though, is that coquina wards spirits both inside and out. So when they encased pretty much the entirety of the city in St. Augustine in that coquina, it's part of the reason we're so haunted now, was the idea, is that no spirits could really leave. That salt thing is a really good point, though. I'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah, that's interesting. How do you spell coquina?
Coquina, I believe.
Coquina. Yes, it does contain salt.
So that's probably why right there.
Yeah. Well, it's just, yeah, I find that interesting that it's something traditional. I didn't even know that the whole city was walled in that stuff, because that would also be more of, that argument of holding spirits at, within, you know. Um,
Mm.
Man, that's crazy. So, yeah, maybe we'll do some salt research after this, Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, awesome. Thanks for being on, man. This was super cool to have you, just like hearing from you. I was wondering, my wife requested, could you tell us the Flagler, what's the name of the mirror room?
Oh, the Psychomantium.
Yes, the Psychomantium. Could you tell us that story as a little wrap up?
Absolutely. Did you want the whole thing or just the Psychomantium bit?
What are you feeling? Is that your favorite part, you think, or does it need the whole story?
I don't think it doesn't necessarily need the whole story. I do really like the Psychomantium bit because for
Okay.
me, I heard a lot about Flagler and Flagler College, which it was the Ponce at the time, but I
Yeah.
had never actually heard the Psychomantium bit or why she went insane up until I started learning about it. So ultimately, at the time, Flagler College was the Ponce de Leon. It was founded by a man named Henry Flagler, who was just he did a lot of things in his life, but when we're talking about how he treated his women, gigantic piece of shit in today's terms, honestly. Well, his wife, this is his second wife, Ida Alice Shrouds Dash Flagler. Uh, she had asked him shortly after she had gotten married to build her a psychomantium. Now, a psychomantium is a reflective room that's meant to help you alter your state of mind for different reasons. Some people think it helps them see the future. Some people do it to help them contact the dead. Various reasons. The issue here with asking Henry Flagler to build you a psychomantium is when in today's terms, billionaire builds you that sort of thing, it might be built too well. The psychomantium is meant to temporarily change your mindset. When Ida Alice Flagler at the time started using it, it seemed to have permanently changed her mindset. She started having these visions that the Tsar of Russia was meant to be married to her and she wasn't supposed to be here. And when she started telling Flagler about these visions, he banned her from the psychomantium. That was the extent of mental health help at the time. Now, if you're a billionaire, that was why the psychomantium was built. But the reason it's so well known here today, if you're a billionaire and your wife can't go into a large or decent chunk of your beautiful inn that you've built, you're probably going to keep your mistresses there if you're super into that, right? Well, that's exactly what Flagler did. And one of his mistresses is still there to this day. Now, we don't exactly know her name because a lot of money was actually, in today's money, I believe it was hundreds of thousands of dollars probably, was spent on keeping her name a secret ultimately. But there was a young woman who had fallen in love with Henry Flagler. Now, I want you to put yourself in her shoes. Imagine you were 16 or 17 and you were able to bag yourself a self-made billionaire. I mean, to the point where he moved you out of your family's house into this billion-dollar resort, into a beautiful psychomantium, and he spent at least a little bit of time with you every single day. You would probably fall head over heels. He would become one of the biggest things in your life, right? Now, I want you to imagine at the same time, every one of those moments that you have with him, every one of those romantic times that you have with him, they almost always end with a bellboy ringing the bell saying, hey, the real Miss Flagler is looking for Mr. Flagler. She wants to spend time with her husband. It's time to, put the toys and the knickknacks back on the shelf. If you were that toy or knickknack, it would probably mess with your self-confidence a little bit. Over time, she decided she would start taking heroin and opioids to help her ease the pain. Unfortunately, if you're living in a psychomantium, heroin and opioids are probably the last thing that you need to be taking. Eventually, after a month or two of taking these heroin and opioids, the pain that she was feeling was just getting too much. It wasn't helping her at all anymore. So she actually left her room, left her psychomantium, and ended up hanging herself off the 4th floor chandelier, where she's still at to this day, violently throwing stuff around. Some people still say they hear screaming. She's making sure, whether or not we know her name, that we still know she was real, she was there, and she's still there today. Um, Definitely a weird, weird story. It's such a concern for the school, actually, that students aren't allowed on the 4th floor.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So like to this day, no one is allowed up there. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The only thing, the only people who are allowed to be up there are maintenance people during renovations. It's been, quote unquote, renovated since I've been here many, many times, and it's almost every renovation has been stopped or restarted for something.
Man. Do you know anybody who's been in that?
Yes, because like I had mentioned, I sold paint, so I did sell a lot of construction workers who worked over in Flagler.
Okay.
I've heard some weird stories, but none of them like having anything thrown at them or anything like that. That's the real stuff that I would love to hear about.
Yeah. Man, that's just so crazy. Like, yeah, how could you not go crazy in a room full of mirrors in general, if that's where you are like being forced to stay, but then adding like heroin and like, it's insane. Like that's so crazy.
And what do you see? Because the way the story's been told, or the way the story goes, billionaire psychomanium, the floor and the ceilings are also reflective. Like, I've thought about this. What do you see when you look at a wall? Do you see the wall behind you looking at the wall in front of you? It's got to be trippy. Absolutely.
Gosh, yeah, that just sounds like torture, just sleeping in that room or trying to sleep or anything. But wow.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for being on. And if you could just like, is there some stuff that you want to plug, or like where could people find you or find your stream?
Oh, absolutely. So on Twitch, I'm Completion Cretin. The biggest thing I would plug is if anybody wanted to go and watch my wrestling or be a part of it, it's called Beatdown. If you type in Beatdown on YouTube, I'm usually like the 4th or 5th video that pops up. Outside of that, not really. It was an awesome being on the show. Thank you for inviting me. I was excited to come on, man. Really appreciative of it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so thankful to have you on, man. It was super fun having you. And go check out Ghost City Tours. Maybe you can see Donnie and go from there. So thanks for being on.
Thank you.